in BIM4Housing. This is the design working group meeting. That doesn't mean everybody that's in it is a designer. It means that it's people that are looking at things from that particular stakeholder group, as it were. And as with all of the BIM4Housing sessions, the principle that we're following here is how can the golden thread of information make things easier for people, both in terms of what they receive and also what they produce. So it's a matter of looking at things from a point of view of not there's a tendency in design and construction and asset management to try and limit the amount of scope and responsibility that people have got. And that's understandable for project reasons, but that can create silos. And those silos, the gaps between those things, are the things that we're trying to plug so that we can then have information in a way that is, the development working group. We've got the development group working group next week, for example, and from this group, we can then say to the development group working group, how could you communicate what you want more effectively, so that we can pick up on it. And correspondingly, if we've got the operations working group tomorrow, and they're going to benefit or suffer from the poor quality information or the quality of information that is passed through from the design group. So Chun and I were talking earlier about the challenges that we've got with design and build, and I think everybody recognises that that's a real difficulty. But the fact is that is, that's where we're at in many cases. So I think rather than the thing I want to get away from, is transferring risk transfer. I think we should be managing risk. And one way of doing that is by working collaboratively. So I don't know if I've gone on long enough, Daz, but that's yeah.
No, that makes all sense. And I guess so, as some of you may or may not know, I'm Das from David Miller Architects. I'm one of the directors, so heading up from a technical point of view within the practice, acting as both on some projects, the Building Safety Act PD and the CDM PD as well. So that's kind of, and within the practice, we are pure architects, work across sectors and RIBA stages, which I guess is quite important. In terms of what we've been discussing in this forum, and please just shout out anything or post something on the chat if there's a question. It's not really a problem at all, or raise a hand. What we've been doing is just giving some updates on a Building Safety Act high risk build project that we're working on, which is a remediation project for residential schemes. And just as a bit of background, without being specific about the project, just for kind of client relationship relations, it's a residential block built in the late 90s, and unsurprisingly, although it should be surprising, there's not a lot of record information available for this estate, which has a couple of HRBs which have been registered by the the management company that are looking at it. Our client is one of those in the developers pledge who signed up. I think there's something like 52 contractors, developers who signed up and are going back to do sort of remediation work on those properties. And so this is our sort of first project where we're going through the gateways, and it's a great sort of learning curve for us. but actually the engagement so far has been really positive. The where we are at the moment is that we're in the gateway uh, gateway gateway 1 has been approved because we've got the planning. Just hold on 1 second, please. Hold on. So, what we've done to date is so we've been appointed by the main contractor who was the original developer on the scheme, and we've and it's technically been developed as a DMB, so pertinent to the question I think that you raised, George. But essentially, because it's under developer's pledge, they're kind of acting essentially as the client themselves and gone in to work with the residents and the resident management organization. And so far, the experience has been very positive. We've engaged with the local authority from a planning point of view. We submitted for planning pre-Christmas, and we've received planning just after New Year. Actually, on the date that the planner said they were going to give a decision, which is I've never had in my life. So, so that was that's a tick in itself, isn't it? So in the scheme, there's some portions of the facade which need to be remediated. Luckily, I guess most of the construction is block work, mineral wall, brickwork, so it's actually quite it doesn't need any work. So as a pilot project, as a first project that we're doing, because it's only limited, it's actually very good in terms of the scope and stuff. Where we are at the moment now is the contractor has appointed the specialist subcontractor, and that has again been, and we're now starting to work through the developing details, which are project specific, manufacturer specific, and certified or tested specific, let's say, which has also been really good at the moment, because what it's picking out is things that we don't know about the building. And I think the general feedback from other groups as well and talking to other professionals is when we're submitting something for the Gateway 2 submission to the building safety regulator, basically you need to try and avoid any assumptions within either structural calculations or external wall build-ups or decking or terraces, etc. So what we've been able to do is by engaging with the specialist, and as they're developing the details, we're saying, actually, we don't really know what's behind that. So let's do another a round of intrusive surveys, for example. So because the risk reward is quite interesting, because if we didn't do those intrusive surveys and we submitted it for the Gateway 2, and there was actually something different on site when we started, having gained approval, there are now what's called like the major major changes or the notifiable changes, and that could set you back a number of weeks or months even, because you found actually on site what you had drawn and got approval for isn't what's actually on site. So what we're saying to our client is, look, spending a day going back to site to unearth what may be behind that build-up, it may only take a day or two, but it's very it's going to be saving you time, actually in the construction stage, to avoid having to go back for these sort of major changes. So that's actually been quite good in that sense. And the team, we've got facade engineers, we've got fire consultants, structural engineers, and now obviously the specialist subcontractors on board. It's enabling us to kind of digitally capture all the certification, and it's making us question the product manufacturers in much more detail than we would have done before, which I think is a good thing. So simply, have you got a test certificate with that substrate against this product, for example? And surprising, what might be on their internet websites could lead you to think actually their product isn't suitable. But we've actually found where when we've actually asked them, their test certification and their third-party certification is actually more aligned to what we have in our project than what they show on the what they have on their websites, for example. So that's been quite interesting, and that's something that we'll take on to the to actual new build projects as well, to make sure that we're not missing something or double checking things. So I think that's part of that cultural change that Dame Hackett, for example, has asked for within the industry to really question. And me acting as a BSAPD, that's clearly one of my roles, is to make sure I keep questioning that, plan, manage, communicate, coordinate the information that's coming through. So at the moment, the aim is to the target is to submit the Gateway 2 application at the end of April. A couple of things that I'm doing which are new is the fire and emergency file. So not done that before, so that's quite interesting. And then also the writing the compliance technical notes for the relevant building regulations. So that's again something that is going to be interesting as I start that, to keep it proportional. So, not writing reams of stuff, but being specific enough that whoever is reading that from the BSR side can easily find or easily understand why we think the regulation is relevant, which kind of version of the regulations we're following, how we're demonstrating what our design strategy to comply, and then signposting them very specifically to the documentation that the team has produced, including subcontractor information, technical drawings, which will all be essentially badged as for construction when we come to submit. So that's kind of where we are at the moment. And the contractor that we're working for has their own sort of common data environment that's being used for maintaining the golden thread. So obviously things like minutes of meetings. We've also migrated the kind of a lot of you might know the RIBA Building Safety Act tracker. So we kind of migrated that onto their system. So that's been quite interesting because that's a bit of a pilot in itself. But as a practice, as an architect, we've always said in the sort of last many years that we've been involved in the discussion that the idea of developing the design with the specialist, with the relevant consultants, to be able to design once and then ideally build it straight after. So essentially more traditional approach rather than DMB. It's good I feel it's good from a designer point of view. Clearly, as a client, they will have to expend more fees if it's a HRB project to be able to get to that stage earlier. But I think from experience of the last sort of 15 years of working on lots of DMB projects is that on paper, the programs are quicker, start on dates are earlier, but reality is that the programs end up getting longer, more sort of variations kick in, more uncertainty. And as George said, what you might get at the end in terms of final record information can be a bit, not aligned to reality. So it's a false economy, I guess, in the kind of say the old world. So I think that is where we would be looking to feed back to people like the development teams, the client employers agent teams, to explain, look, if you get the design right first, yes, you may have to expend more money and it might take a bit longer, but actually the certainty of site periods and the certainty of getting it on completed to the quality that you want theoretically should be more clear and less sort of ambiguous. Obviously, time will tell because only projects are only getting through. And the other final thing I can think is the numbers that are coming from the building safety regulator and the things that they're doing. I think there's an innovation team that they've set up as well. Is obviously trying to speed up the processes to unlock the backlog. I think the numbers are getting better in terms of approvals, etc. Still a long way to go, but at least they're going in the right direction. And obviously, it's in everyone's interest in this call, sorry, and in the industry to make sure that our submissions are clear, proportionate, clear, accurate, because if they're not, then we're only blocking each other from the developments and the schemes getting onto site quickly, which is not good for any of us, I think, on this call. So that's kind of an overview of, I guess, where we are. Happy to take any questions or any. It'd be good to hear if some others have had similar experiences. Like I said, we're kind of on the beginning of this journey, and on the back of this first project, we've got another 3 that we're doing with the same contractor. So from a business point of view, it's also very positive, because I think there's something like 14,000 HRB buildings existing in the country already, so they'll all need some sort of work. It's not necessarily sometimes considered the most glamorous piece of work from a pure architecture point of view, but from a technical point of view for learning of in relation to putting into new builds, I think it's been really really enlightening. So I'll kind of stop my little monologue there. Just see, yeah, any comments or queries will be really really welcome.
Okay. Any thoughts on that?
Anyone else going through the gateway process at the moment as a designer or a consultant? Hi, Anna. I'm sure you
Hello.
you are.
Hello.
How you doing?
Yeah, good. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Good, good. Happy New Year, everyone. Oh well, you
Happy New
as well.
Year. I know, but it's nice to say first time you see people.
Yeah.
Really, really, really valuable. Thank you. And sharing all of your experience and some of the pain as well. I just wanted to ask, how did you deal with fire stopping? Did you have a very large schedule? A very, very
The
endless schedule? I'm only asking because oh, we want to be very organized. We want to try and automate. It's so far not been very easy or very intelligent, if that makes sense. Partly because of the consultants we're working with, partly because of the amount of information that we are dealing with. And I'm just honestly sharing that. I don't have any examples in front of me, but I can ask if it's useful to share at one of the following meetings. I think it's like a perfect workflow that should be automated, and yet it actually requires quite a lot of manual person work basically, because it's also very responsible. So yeah.
yeah, it's a good question, George. I've got your hand up. So if I say something first, and if you follow up, that'd be quite good.
Mm,
I presume George is probably saying there is the passive fire team or someone who's already doing some
mm,
of this work in the background. But how we
yeah.
have done it on a previous project, pre-gateway, etc., was it was a volumetric project. And I know
Mhm,
Lee on the call is doing DFMA stuff. So it was our kind of really our first volumetric scheme. And if you can imagine, the volumetric scheme has lots of voids between
yeah.
every single volume. And we did a very crude approach on that scheme, which was we simply just created some masses in Revit. We use Revit,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore there was a schedule of all the fire stopping in the scheme, which we gave to the team on site. Sorry, in the factory. So it could be ticked off visually, that every single one of those has been installed in the factory, checked by the regulator, building control in that case. Then as it was brought to site, it was then checked again, and then once installed, it was checked again. So the schedule
Mm,
was used, I guess, 2 or 3 times, but
mm,
from a geometrical point of view, it was very simple extrusion, but obviously valuably, it gave the ability to
mm.
schedule and create a very simple schedule. Now, we haven't got to that stage in this project.
Okay.
However, even just finding a certified fire stopping, whether that's full fill or the intumescent type, for example, it's been trickier. There's one scenario where we got block work and a new rain screen cladding. That's been
Mm,
slightly more straightforward. And what has been helpful is that the rain screen manufacturer has also had a particular manufacturer's fire stopping tested as an assembly with their
right.
thing. So they're the kind of questions that we're learning to ask now is, well, have you got
Mm,
a fire stopping manufacturer that you've used as part of your tests in the first place? Because if it has, then it's very stupid for us to then go, well, we'll want to use someone else
somewhere
for
else. Yeah.
no
Yeah.
apparent, because they wouldn't be tested, or it's unlikely to be tested. In another scenario on the same building, we've got block work and essentially it's a plywood that we've got to bridge the gap. And that's the one where on the website, when Lee, my colleague Lee from DMA, who's on the call, head of specification, when he looked at it online, they seemed to only show tests between masonry and masonry. But when we actually talked to them, they were like, oh no, we do actually have testing. And they've become the front runner, let's say,
Mm,
because that's quite an unusual scenario in terms of block work and plywood and a sort of a cavity and then a bit of insulation and stuff because it was sort of a timber cladding area. So that has opened our eyes to that, you can't just rely on looking at online, because actually it could be doing that manufacturer a disservice themselves because their online kind of technical data isn't up to date. So that's something we're kind of learning. And again, Andy and Lee, in terms of the specification specific side and the Uniclass, for example, that's making us drill down more. Products that we thought were perfectly fine before, we're like, hold on, let's just double check. And I think that is what the industry is. There are some manufacturers who are going through other accreditations to say what we've tested is fine. And our fire consultants also asking us, okay, the manufacturer's done their own testing, but has a third party verified their certification or testing? Because, and that's been quite interesting to learn, because I think typically I would have thought, well, if the manufacturer's done testing at Warrington or wherever it might be, you would take that for granted. Well, they've done the testing, they've got a certificate. But what we're learning from the fire consultants, sometimes those certificates are also a bit of a view taken by the manufacturers. Whereas if you got a third party who's looked at the test data and is verifying that view / certificate, well, that's very good. That's kind of the better, more robust sort of approach. And I think when we come to on our project in the models, we will tag, or we will create those fire stops in Revit as objects. Some of them will be open state, some of them will be solid state, and we will they'll be linked back to the content library / the master specification that we create. So that's I think how we're looking to approach it. George, sorry, you had your hand up, and David afterwards.
Yeah, sure. So I think there's two elements to this. There's the work that you and Anna would do, which is ensuring that the need for fire stopping has been taken account of and is being accommodated. And then there's the record of what was actually done. Yeah. Now, what we've been doing an active plan over the last 18 year or so, 18 months, is looking at how we can capture the information from the other software applications that are being used to record the fire stopping information. And I've got a couple of examples of that I can show anybody that's interested, but I don't want to jump in and be doing that. But the absolutely critical thing there, in my view, is that the people that are actually doing the installation work, there needs to be a simple way of them recording what product they've used, where they've used it, and also any other vagaries there. The earlier part of that process, identifying where fire stopping is needed, there are some quite interesting technologies that are being used at the moment. Multivista, for example, have got a tool that will it will scan and identify where there are holes or gaps. Now, they've used that on a hospital project. I don't know how effective it really is, and I think that needs to be investigated a bit, but it's an interesting technology. The other thing I would say is that I've been, there's a guy called Paul McSolly, who's some of you know.
Yep.
Paul was a director at Mace, and it's quite interesting that there's a court case at the moment between Mace and Mighty over fire dampers, which is one of the things that Paul's been absolutely focused on for some time now. And he's a member of the Association of Passive Fire Protection, who are the people that are responsible for fire stopping. But also, he's gone through the process of identifying the selection of a fire damper and whether it's going into the right substrate for that particular specification. And he's also educated me to the extent that he can on the importance of knowing what the spaces on either side of that fire damper are. And this is exactly the same for fire stopping, by the way. And he's given me, which I can show briefly, the sort of decision matrix that a designer needs to go through to pick the right product. And it's absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, I will just share it now, just to we won't go into it in any detail. But the reason I'm saying it is that I think it shows the absolute criticality of the golden thread and the complexity of it. And it needs to be an iterative process. So these are Paul's slides. So going from a descriptive specification to a prescriptive specification. So in other words, picking the actual product. And this is the process that is mapped out for a fire damper. So this is going through these different steps of saying you need to know not just whether you've got a product that does the job, it's also what job is it doing? And being able to make sure, which we're going to come on to in a minute, what Andy's talking about, which is classification, that being able to relate the different steps through this process and making sure that you've got the right product in the right substrate, and then being able to do this in a way that is auditable, and also making sure that supports are there in place. So it's a matter not just of fire stopping, it's what is it that you're fire stopping. So the combination of the fire doors, for example, knowing where all the fire doors are and what wall it is. And he's then gone through and produced this process. Now, I've not yet discussed this with Paul recently, but this is something that's classic for AI to be able to help with. That doesn't mean that AI's got to make the decisions, but it's a way of. So if anybody's interested, and then smoke control is even more complex. That's the point he was making there. But I don't know if that's something that people are interested in, because I think compartmentation, I think, is going to be absolutely critical to this whole process.
Yep.
We've got a court case at the moment, which has just been kicked off by Lend-Lease. They are they're claiming from Balfour Beatty for a building. This is a compartmentation issue, I believe, that goes back 25 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So a lot of the things that we're doing. So you've got a number of different things, drivers there that are pushing that forward. I'll stand back, David. David Simpson?
Hello, yes. Yes, David Simpson from Associated Architects. So we've recently completed 2 buildings just last year. One was medium-rise apartment blocks, which just got through on the pre-flight or the in-flight arrangements under the BSA, but was beginning to highlight an awful lot of issues and has changed some of the working practices that we have for our current projects. And another one was a 3-story SEND school, which again was completed just last year, where the contractor in particular was trying to use it to highlight how they deal with builders' work penetrations and fire stopping. So for the residential, first of all, the main thing that came out of it was exactly that, for fire stopping of the external walls. And we had the same discussions about compatibility of substrate and what was the fire stopping tested for. Further complicated then by the fact that we had a relatively thin slab edge and some quite complicated masonry support angles hanging off that, all in the same zone that the fire stopping needed to be in. So it was also making sure that all the fire stopping was certified for being penetrated up to a certain percentage by the masonry support angles, making sure that the fire stopping had fire test data for SFS and brickwork. We also had quite a lot of brickwork modelling, very deep recesses, window reveals, some unusual brick bonds, which meant the inner cavity face of the brickwork wasn't necessarily flat, and because of that, quite large cavities, which were often, again, beyond the fire tested width of some of the fire stopping. So we had to introduce additional inner leaves of brickwork at floor zones to reduce those cavity widths down back to what was certified, which in turn increased the brickwork support angle requirements because they were then carrying more masonry. So there was an awful lot of work there to make sure that all of that coordinated. But the key takeaway for us as architects for that, which we'd never done before, was make sure that we model all of those items, so that we can schedule it, we can tie it to the specification. So you've then got data to hand on to the contractor to make sure that they can track, has it been installed, is it the correct specification, and continue to build that golden thread. And then we can then display those in any view from the model, to make sure that it coordinates with everything. So that was a big change from what we've done traditionally.
Karen, David, sorry.
I was going to say then on the schools, it was an awful lot of fire stopping, particularly on corridor lines, and we were pressed by the contractor to elevate every single builder's work opening. And we had sort of 3 people working on it flat out for 3 months, pretty much, to produce lots of 1 to 20 coordinated elevations. But the first step we did was a basic clash test, filtering by fire rating of wall type and surfaces going through those, which allowed us to first of all identify all the locations where fire stopping of the builder's work was required. Then by that stage, we knew who the fire stopping provider was going to be, and therefore what their rule sets were for different sizes and types of opening. So we were then able to use a dynamo routine to automatically generate a simple box in the model at all of those locations, and then link that to an Excel lookup table that would automatically size those openings based on the data it was pulling out of the M&E model for the size of the surfaces that were going through, and generate the initial size of that box. Then we did a bit more of a manual coordination exercise then to particularly check the spatial positioning of those boxes against various other rule sets, like in particular the British gypsum rule sets, for how close can 2 builders' work objects be, where is how does it relate to the deflection head zone. So we actually modeled in a very, very thin ceiling object at the maximum height that a builder's work object could be before it interferes with that deflection head detail for all of the different wall types. So again, we could run clash detection on that to make sure that the builder's work objects weren't going to clash with that, and then decide whether those were 3-sided builder's work openings up to the soffit, or were they, as you require for a damper or ductwork, a 4-sided one that has to be below that zone. So there was an awful lot of work there, and then we've been working with the contractor since to understand how we can streamline that process and whose responsibility each of those things best sit in, and are the elevations, which for us was actually the most time-consuming thing to do and check, are they actually required if you've done a much more thorough model-based process of all of that, which can spit out a schedule at the end of it. And I think we're working through on our subsequent projects with the same contractor as to exactly how we do that.
Okay, so my suggestion does on this, I think there's a rich area of interest. So we just spent half an hour talking about it. I think this is something that if people are interested in the fire stopping side of things, and I don't think it is just fire stopping, it's compartmentation really. If you're interested in that area, would you just put fire stopping into the chat? Because what we'll do is we can do a follow-up, maybe one-to-one or some sort of session with you on it, and we can bring into it members of the ASFP, because the ASFP they've got a group that's looking at the golden thread specifically. So we've then got the opportunity to bring together the approaches. And what David said there is brilliant, and I know that I know because I've seen what David Miller Architects are doing as well. There's a lot of really good thinking around this. One thing I would say, and this is maybe something for Andy Green, is I had a meeting last week with one of the other big consultants, and we've got a number of different components in BIM in asset management in particular that we're addressing on this, and one of them is fire strategy plans. Yeah. Now the context of that, and also we've got a schools group that David's interested in. But the fire strategy plan, I didn't realize until relatively recently how important it is. Now, that may be just, my lack of knowledge. Maybe everybody else is fully aware of it. But one of the consultants was telling me that they had reviewed the fire strategy plan for a hospital, and there was and part of the reason for that is that there was a lot of fire dampers that hadn't been inspected. They should have been, but they hadn't. And there was therefore a major sort of discrepancy there, non-conformance. What they've actually done is they looked at the fire strategy plan again, and they identified that there were far too many compartments from a fire strategy point of view. So therefore, a lot of the walls that were considered compartmentation walls actually didn't need to be compartmentation walls. And it took out something like 120 fire dampers and also firewalls from needing to be inspected as rigorously as that. Now, Andy, I know it's not your part of the business, but I know Atkins do that type of thing, don't they? Does that make sense, what I've just said there?
Yes, it does, yeah.
So that strategically becomes a very interesting way of making the building safer, but not actually spending more money. In fact, actually saving money. David. Oh, sorry.
No, that's right. No, I'll just quickly say something. I think David, actually, the examples and stuff you showed or talked about was really interesting. I think the couple of things on the fire strategy that you mentioned as well, George, is with some buildings being more complicated in a section as well, with sort of multiple user groups, etc. I know some fire consultants are generating sort of 3D markups of fire compartmental design, because typically you normally get plans, but they don't tell the whole story, especially if you've got, as I said, multiple users, programs, different kind of types of resi on top of commercial, on top of something else, for example. So that's something we're kind of trying to encourage our fire consultants to kind of think in, because we can give them sections through models for them to be able to either mark up via sections or some consultants are able to bring in the model and mark up compartmental lines in section as well as plans, which I think it's avoids sort of certain things getting missed, especially in kind of complicated sectional buildings. But then there's also on one of the schemes, on the remediation, the fire stopping at floor level has been done properly, but the pipe itself is plastic, so it needed something to kind of almost crush it, or an intumescent. So you think everything is selected and done, but actually it's the pipe that's the weak point, not the fire stopping.
Yeah,
so mustn't
absolutely.
forget the mustn't kind of sort of forget some of the basics, I guess, or the simple things as well when we're looking at all these workflows and trying to figure out what it is. And I think, oops, sorry.
I was just going to say, the thing I've learned from talking to fire stopping people is that the sealant that they use, it can actually damage and make brittle. If they use the wrong I can't remember what the term is, but if they use the wrong sealant, it can make the plastic pipe brittle.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what I pick up. David, I'll pan back to you.
Okay, I think the thing that was interesting there, and something we've had in particular a lot of discussion with both Stantec and Arup about over the last year, is that shift or transfer of responsibility between the information that's in the fire strategy document, which ideally would have marked up plans and sections, but occasionally doesn't, and the implementation of that in the fire strategy drawings that we produce, that then cascade on down through the rest of it. And we've been talking particular with Arup about use of speckle for them to input in fire requirements into our model without them touching our model. So that's been very useful. We haven't yet done it, but it's certainly something we've been talking about. So how do you combine the responsibility of somebody else who isn't a modeler having responsibility over data which does go into the model, into somebody else's model, really to make sure that things don't get missed when we transfer that information. We've also been looking at other bits of software. You mentioned doors earlier. Something that Revit won't do natively. It doesn't tell you information about, or you can't schedule out information about the wall that a door is in. But we use other bits of software like ID8 BIM Link, which is just a very simple but very effective way of spitting information out to an Excel spreadsheet and putting it back in again. And it will tell you information about the host object that is hosting a door. So we can use that to check, has the wall got a fire rating? Therefore, should the door have a fire rating? As well as doing it visually within Revit. And then finally, and this may be, George, when you mentioned about the rationalization of firewalls, keeping very clear within the model in two separate parameters, what is the fire rating that the fire strategy requires, as opposed to what is the fire rating that that partition system actually achieves. Because very often, in particular in school environments where we've got relatively high acoustic values, the specification of the partition is actually driven by the achieved acoustic value, and that will by default then have a 30 or a 60-minute fire rating, and it may not actually need that for the fire strategy.
I think that's a really key point, David, because I think that's often the case with fire doors, for example, where people will buy 1,000 fire doors because of the quality of them, but actually only 100 of them are actually being installed in fire compartments.
Yep.
And that can make a big difference. Yeah, agreed. I mean, just to put the context again of the importance of these BIM4Housing meetings being connected. So it's just reminded me, the original reason I started investigating fire strategy plans was at this meeting back in, I think, probably August or July, when Daz was talking about the PDBR role, and we were discussing it. And one of the big challenges was that you can't get fire engineers full of no money at the moment because they're already very busy. So what we tried to do was see if we could pull together ways that we could use better processes to make it easier for a fire engineer to do a fire strategy plan. And we've now held 2 meetings with fire engineers, and we've come out some ways of doing it that substantially will cut the time needed to create fire strategy plans. And importantly, I had a meeting with the London Fire Brigade last week. They say, or certainly one of their experts says, you don't actually need a fire engineer to do a fire strategy plan. You need somebody that understands compartmentation. And therefore, and that's not necessarily a fire engineer. So that, I thought that was interesting as well. So the reason I'm saying it is that we've got a recording of the workshops on fire strategy plans. So if you're interested in connecting with people that are trying to drive the cost of fire strategy plans down, but also make them better, we're using 360 photography as part of that process. Then, you know, put fire strategy plan into the chat, and we'll send you the links on that. Back to you, Daz.
No, thank you. I think what I'm aiming to do, as I said, is going forward in the next couple of months, we will actually be ramping up to generating the documentation, obviously, and all the drawings and stuff for the submission. So my aim is to just kind of continue to share, on one hand, any kind of major learnings from that as we go through these live projects. And so we've got a couple of them, some are HRB, some are not, but the process that we're following are the same for all of those projects, which again, I think is the right attitude and what's required. And that's nice for the main contractor to be leading on that attitude as well, which is sometimes half the challenge. So that's what I aim to do. Nothing more particularly from my side. Maybe hand over to Andy, or if anyone else got any other questions.
That's exactly what I was going to suggest. That's good.
We're in sync, George. We're syncing.
So can I just explain why I've invited Andy to this session? One of the things that we're trying to do overall is improve the golden thread by better asset information, better information generally, rather than just asset information. And a fundamental part of that is classification and taxonomy, and making sure that everybody's using the right terminology for the right purpose. And I've known Andy for many, many years. And one of the things that he's been pioneering for quite some time is trying to rationalize a lot of the different classification systems that are working together. We as Active Plan have been trying to do that as well. We spent 10 years on it. And there's a lot of blockers in the way because people need different types of classification for different purposes. It's not a matter of trying to achieve a single classification system for everything. I mean, that's essentially what originally people were talking about is uniclass for, but it's not really suitable for that. There's all sorts of different classification systems that are needed for different purposes. But what I'd like to do is Andy's kindly agreed to just come on and explain the work that they've been doing. So thanks, Andy.
Thank you all, and appreciate the chance to just share what's taken 30 years to get to where we are now. Probably known George for most of that period, so welcome. For those, just to say who I am, I worked for Atkins for 30 years, involved in from the early PFI days, if that's not a swear word, through to whole life costing, asset management, and now asset information management is my specialty. I'm the author of the NRM suite. I'm the author of the Disability Guide M Lifecycle, and many other things I've helped to author. My passion is to put into practice workable, pragmatic use of the right things for the right purpose. I've majored in the buildings into operation and how the operation can look after the building and refurb it through its whole life. And I've been privileged to work for Network Rail, for Dubai Airport, for Heathrow, for most of the big government departments on how they want to asset their estates. And to be perfectly honest, there is so much fragmentation and confusion, we really need to sort it out. Hence, a couple of years ago, the RSCS, CIBSE, Uniclass, SFG20 decided they wanted to get together to join up their standards to then help people know how to use them for the right purpose in the right way. And they created an alliance. So what's called the ADS, the Asset Data Standards or Aligned Data Standards Alliance, is the merging of 4 data standards bodies. I'll show you a few slides just to help you bring this to life rather than just me talking all the time. And I know you're recording, so feel free to refer to these. So what is the alliance? It's the RSCS, it's Uniclass, which is now being purchased, as you know, with National Building Specs, with SFG20, which is part of the BISA group, which is the maintenance standards, and CIBSE for life in and managing the asset over its sort of wearing out and needs replacing or renewing. And they got together for the purposes of being more joined up, because buildings are pretty mature at adding the design of constructors use Uniclass, which links to the MBS specifications. Pretty obvious, and BIM has matured how to use it in accommodate environments, and therefore it's become sort of the way we all now work. And I heard a lot of people talking about how we use that. The problem is at the end of the project, when we lose all the data or don't have the data we should have in place to run the building, somebody comes in and starts all over again, and then we're working out whether the fire stopping works and all the other things. It's just plain bonkers. So we need a common language that can feed through into the operational phase. And I noticed in your minutes from September, your shared industry challenges were lack of a common language, fragmented data, inconsistent modeling standards, and poor information flow into life cycle stages. Well, in essence, that's what the Alliance is trying to help you to do. So a common language I'll show you in a moment, and the various schedules do now link up.
Great.
But previously they didn't, and hence by working together, each of the bodies have adjusted their standards so they do line up. So the Uniclass can talk to NRM to allow us to cost BIM models, funny enough, and to quantify off of a BIM model using the rules of measurement is much more efficient than scale rules and all the things that go with it. And if we hand over buildings, we can link Uniclass through into the maintenance regime and turn on SFG20, or we can link it through to life in and do the renewal and forward maintenance plans. And more importantly, yes, from active plan is we can create libraries of how we want the asset to perform, not just in construction, but through its operational phase, and build in what works and what doesn't work to get the best product and standardizes comes with this. And all of these mean that the tables that previously people have produced to market are being reissued. In fact, the RSCS will be issuing those in the next week or two. CIBSE will be issuing those in early Feb, and the Uniclass will be issuing those with links to the other standards. They all join up, and SFG will link their maintenance standards to all the other 3. So the industry will be gifted free issue a way of unifying all the standards, and that's going to happen in the next few days. Why is that important? If I just get my machine to work, it's just stuck on me. Done again. So basically, we can actually build a building, a heating system, choose a boiler, and pick the relevant specification, or decide we're going to go heat pumps and don't have any gas boilers at all. It's just a taxonomy. But we can link it then to the maintenance regime, the life in regime, and look which one most optimal and the best value thing to do. And we can link to that data around fire stopping and other things can all be hung off the same taxonomy. So all the classifications at any level, element level, component level, sub-element level, building level, have now been mapped. And it took 132 attempts to get it to all map, and the adjustment has now been done. So the ability to work out how we build, operate, maintain, renew, and sustain a building, we can be better at if we use the right for housing or for schools, hospitals, whatever. The bulk of this conversation has been around safety. The Building Safety Act is really up to our games because of fire stopping and flammable and cladding and so forth. But SFG20 has 37 statutory inspections you should do. So what I'm observing is we need to be rounded. that it isn't just meeting the Fire Safety Act at the golden thread of handover, it's making sure the building has the size Legionella, pressure testing and all the other 37 items, and it rounds it off. And we can do that through different means. The problem I'm seeing is we hand over buildings and then someone comes along and starts all over again. We lose the data. Madness. We must be able to improve how we move it into operation. So where the Alliance is moving to now, they've lined up all their standards, is to solve the 9 industry problems that we can all relate to. So what information do I need to run my housing or my school or my hospital over its whole life? And how do I get the design data linked to cost data linked to FM? It's shown how to do that, but I won't try and bore you with the detail of that right now. But we've proven that on some of the biggest projects in the world. Can we cost and carbon off a BIM model? Yes, we've proven that with the RICS to move into what's called 5D costing and carbon is also now possible, but it's not mainstream, so the RICS need to promote it widely to help people do it. What most of this meeting's been about is handover and the Building Safety Act and the golden thread. We know how to enhance COBE, to improve its use and automate it straight into an operational model and do it in about 4.5 minutes, not keep doing it and then people mess it up and don't run it properly and all the data's lost. And we proved that on 89 of the government property agency buildings to show it can be done, to enhance the handover into ops and the data is used in the right format in the right way, using the relevant standards to turn on the maintenance, the renewal, fire up the CAFN system, an asset register that solves multiple purposes and tracks compliance. Fire stopping, 37 other items, and is maintained optimally, not just over maintained or under maintained, and the right budget is assigned to it. Really, really important. Otherwise, we build buildings that then don't quite perform as we'd like because, funny enough, others come in and do fragmented approach and the data is not there or not used or not recreated. We don't run it correctly. And we can manage and renew it, would then could trigger refurbishment projects. And there's an awful lot of the government buildings. In fact, probably 90% of the government buildings in the future will be look after the assets you've got and refurbish them and keep them going and bring them back for the use of the public to have hospitals, schools particularly. And there's a £49 billion backlog maintenance problem right now. The Cabinet Office need this to be sorted out. And we make most of the buildings we have and refurbish them and build the new ones as well. But we need quick wins to stop the deterioration in backlog is very much what the Alliance is trying to now help to make reality. And then using it commercially and asset performance are all other factors. So as we speak, the standards can be lined up. Housing could create a model. How would we use it to link what we build, to maintain, to replace and sustain? And the data could be packaged to be more effective of a standard house and try and make sure we do it better in the design and less backfit required in the handover in the operation. And we make sure it meets the golden thread is the model that we know is doable. And there's thousands of houses or probably tens of thousands, millions of houses in the world. The same principle applies for school, a hospital. We are packaging this up to say, what would the optimum use of the data look like that 288 NHS trusts could then use rather than have to keep reinventing the wheel 288 times. So this is where we're heading, is the use of the standards for the right purpose. Uniclass, great for building it, great for location space, but it doesn't tell you how to cost it. NRM does. It doesn't tell you how to maintain it. SFG does. It doesn't tell you how to life it. SIBT does. Back to George's point, the right use of the right standards can therefore create a whole life cost model, design model, FM model is basically now a possibility that we've actually put together. The 3 tables, all the tables you see there will be made available free issue in the next few days and weeks, which means most people are then going, how do we use them? Hence the Alliance Phase 2 is to help to put them into practice. How does the BIM model link to cost and carbon? How does the COBE model link to better handover into operations? How does the use of the retained estates be managed by a proper asset register? Cabinet Office want that to happen and encouraging everyone to follow it. How do we address backlog by better condition and better investment planning? And how do we benchmark accordingly to help drive out where the efficiencies and improvements can achieve? So I'll run through that very quickly. Appreciate that's throwing a lot at you. So maybe questions is the best thing to do now. And happy to answer any questions you may have.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andy. Franco, have you got any questions? Go ahead, Franco. You're on mute. You're on mute, Franco.
Okay, now you can hear. Well, what can I say? I have dedicated decades to this challenge, and this is what Andrew has told us is music to my ears. George knows how many times I have pronounced the term common language, so I am very interested in, I don't know, helping, sharing my experience, my scars deriving from the lack of common language internationally in mega projects and large projects. So that's all I wanted to say.
Well, just on the helping, because I'm at the old age of 66 and having to write standards, 2015 was the NRM and CIBSI I've updated 3 times now. I just want people to use them properly. And before I, put my chips or retire and go and help the wife go around the world, yourself and others, we want to accelerate the adoption. Now, what's very opportune is the Cabinet Office have a problem right now. Backlog maintenance is out of control. Fire safety needs to be sorted out. Asset surveying is being done in a fragmented approach by flyby surveying, running around doing 2 calls a day, saying they know the condition of it based on about 2 hours on site. This is nonsense. And the fire stopping and all the other regulations, the new Safety Act means that building surveyors and others have jumped up and go, we can do that all for you, add it to our service, give us a job. But they forget there's 37 other things that they don't understand. They don't even know what SFG is, half of the surveyors we've spoken to. So how can they do it properly? They're just focusing on one topic that gets fees rather than making the building safe. So in all truthfulness, I think we need to help people to create what good looks like and then induct more people to follow it, which is why I deliberately said, if the NHS and their estate code understand how to turn on the asset model that everybody can borrow, the architects, FM, 288 trusts do not need to keep reinventing it, do not need to work out how to do fire stopping. We should create a model that others use as exemplar through that, and then the Association of Directors of Estates, or ORD, could do it through all the different universities in the country. So what we're about as the core members is helping to create the blueprint for others to repeat and scale. That's our remit from here on. And with the Cabinet Office back in, with the bodies back in, and if the RSCS improve their guidance and others then put it into practice and show the efficiency and the power of being more joined up, so we don't have buildings handed over into nowhere land or surveyors going around doing a slice of it and the FM guy does another slice and they don't connect. And then things like Active Plan could be the host of good data and provide it in a form that people can use and consume and keep up to date and improve, is the world I see. And I'm pretty sure everybody agrees with that. The issue is we've been living in a fragmented, disconnected world is crazy. So I'll stop there and ask any questions. David, you're next.
Not so much a question as to just again echo Franco's sentiment that this is wonderful. That all of this joining up of standards. We've been doing quite a lot of work with university estates departments, particularly University of Birmingham, University of Oxford, who have been using NRM to link through to SFG 20. But to have a sort of a standardized, agreed mapping between those two would be amazing, because ourselves as architects don't understand SFG 20.
No, they keep changing it. They keep updating it as well.
We can get our head around NRM, so that's wonderful. And similarly, for some of our smaller projects, often with local authorities who have been told they need COBE, or they've often been told they just need BIM level 2 without understanding what that means or what that meant. Helping them to understand what they actually need, which again is usually SFG 20, and how do we provide only the data that they need. So again, we've been working with quite a few clients to get mappings from Uniclass to SFG 20 to tell the design team which items we have to prepare COBE for. So to have all this standardized is wonderful in my view. That's fantastic.
Just before John comes in, the bottom line is that if SFG help to make bespoke sets, then you don't have to keep reinventing it. And I'm aware that Sodexo and Mighty and CBRE keep reinventing it. The problem they have is the client, not really sure what they're asking for, keeps asking for Uniclass or something else and puts it in the contract, and then they're forced to do something that's not right. And it's happened on 2 of the major players recently, to which Sodexo are going, we can't do this, but the client's saying it's got to do it, it's in the contract. And the misunderstanding of how Uniclass is for designers to design building and do space planning and its rightful use is where the ignorance is forcing the client's request to be unworkable and frankly wasting people's time and money and creating the wrong outcome. So if nothing else, the voice of the Alliance is to help say, all you clients, this is what you should be aware of. So answer it more intelligently and help the supplier chain help you get the right data. Stop asking for something that's not right. And that's the problem. There's massive confusion in the market and people are just making it up. Doesn't help. Sorry, Chan.
A question for Andrew. We like to work with you. Is capture knowledge, engineering templates, the fire solutions, so we can automate the entire design without human intervention. Yeah. If you have any system, we can work with you as well. We've been automating lots of stuff for SAP systems down to the bolts and nuts, design for manufacturing assembly. And all the project we do just issue the manufacturing fabrication shop drawings or manufacturing code. So the fire is our one priority. It's a huge market there.
It is.
So it's just common sense. We have the team come from Bombardier, Lamborghini, and also there's another guy from ex-Frank Gehry Technologies, who did the hardcore modeling. So yeah, we have the expertise.
I don't doubt. I think you said Andrew, so it might be for the other people on this call called Andrew. I tend to be Andy. Yeah. The quick question: I am impressed of the passion people have to get the fire stopping right, the design right, and everything else. My worry is all that good work gets lost the moment you hand the building over. And the FM come across on a 2-bit approach FM company to then leave Fred, who's been given the job to carry on when they've swapped contractors based on the procurement to sort out fire stopping, is not getting the data you've spent lots of effort and time to make available. We've got to make that connection for people to use it as much as you create the right answer in the design that others should take into practice. And that pass-through must stop being a disconnect and a mess. And if you're going to take the Fire Safety Act, it's like a handover 2-way. And for GPA, we made the contract. You can't run away from the project until you've given it to FM and they've accepted it as safe to operate and they've accepted all the documents into their SharePoint, or you can't finish the job. We wrote it into the contract, 2-way handover, not we'll do COBE, we'll do government soft landings, we'll play lip service, and it never really happens. We have to make this your good data go somewhere and others can act on it and the procurement enforces it. And I say that because it ain't happening in 99% of the times. And all the good work you're talking about is not the norm. George?
Yeah, so David, the solution, I know Birmingham University did the mapping between Uniclass and SFG20. The problem is that's very simplistic from an asset management point of view. If I just explain why that's the case. So SFG20 is developed by BISA, which is the Building and Environmental Services Association, and principally, and I'm not saying exclusively, but principally it's about M&E. So therefore, from an asset management point of view, there's a lot more to asset management than M&E. And it's also not just about planned and preventative maintenance. It's also about life cycle, which is why Andy was talking about Subsea Guide M. But again, that's largely M&E. So what I think we need to do is look at it in a more holistic way and relate things to the asset and to the product, and then assign against each of those elements the most appropriate classification for that, which is really what Andy is doing with this new process.
Sorry, George, it's already done because this is not just M&E anymore. It's the whole shebang, from facilitated works, fabric, external works, fabric specialist, and the whole shebang.
In SFG 20.
Now, the SFG includes fabric, includes external
Yeah.
works. Okay, because when I wrote NRM3 in 2000, I linked it to the SFGs they had at the time, and they've added from 500 to 2,300 now. The problem you got is there's too many schedules in alphabetical order. People don't know which ones to choose to add to your housing or your school. It's why they need to package it to make it easier for you to say a school set, hospital set, a housing set. It's too complicated. Okay, but the bottom line is they do all link up for the whole Monty, as you rightly say. We need them, and we do need to make them easier to add libraries and add product data to cover the topics that you think are important, fire safety being one of the top ones.
Yes, and the other thing, the reason, David, that COBie is important or useful, because COBie isn't telling you what information is being collected, it's providing a schema to gather it and deliver it, as you know. But the two things that Andy hasn't mentioned, which I know is part of what his overall solution is FMS 002, which is the facilities management standard, and also GovS 004.
Yep.
Now, the reason I'm saying that is that the context of where that asset is, where it is, and what it's doing is equally important from an asset management point of view to just saying what it is. And therefore it needs to be more holistic. And that really, if it's used properly, that's what COBie delivers.
Well, sorry, if I may, COBie stands for Construction Operational Building Information Exchange at the end of a project, new build or refurb. It does not cover information that you'd use for FM. There's a top up needed. We proved that on the biggest project in the world, Neon the Line in Saudi Arabia. There's as many additional attributes to run the asset that you would not ask the designers to provide because it would cost too much and they don't have that data. So there's another half, and there's a misconception that COBie fudge can sort out FM. It can't. It can just pass the data across. The other problem is if you pull all the data out of a BIM model, which is important to do, and BAM and Waits and big contractors have been doing that, they create a big asset register of 3,000-4,000 items. But you need to roll up all the light fittings so it's by floor. Otherwise, you've got too many task schedules being sent out by the FM guy. It's unworkable. Okay, so the simple translation of the COBie data is halfway there, and top it up with how do you want the asset to perform? Do you want sensors and monitoring data and other things? Add to it is the solution that we're working on. And on Neon, they did use cases for running the buildings from day one in a digital world. Added the other half that we're missing. So we know what we should be put into it, but COBie is, because that's the only thing we got at the moment, is assumed to be close and it will work. I'm sorry, it only gives you what the designers did and constructed. It doesn't cover all the other aspects of FM that you need to top up the data with. Is the future.
I agree, Andy. The point that I would go back to, though, is the first slide, first point that you made, and that's the asset information requirements.
Yes.
Now, we're using the COBie schema to incorporate all of the asset information requirements because it is a straightforward thing to be able to do. So as long as the asset information requirements are properly defined at the outset, and you can then audit against them, then I think we've got a winner.
I think you're right, but all I'm saying is it's a part of it. It may give you 70%, and we should help people use it better. The point I'm saying is if the FM guys goes, how does this support sustainability sort of commitments you've made? There are extra data to justify that as attributes would make it complete. If you don't condense it and know how to make it workable for the FM, we're just firing across too much data that's over the top. Okay, so it's that translation is the difference we're trying to help people get to better use the data to address the prime problem of hand over buildings and don't lose it and make it fit for purpose in the operational use phase. Going the extra mile, should we say? Not just we can do the COBie transfer job done. Make it workable, find out the things that don't quite work and sort them is where we're heading. Sorry, Andrew, you got your hand up.
No, I was just going to say the point I think you made about I guess, advising the client team about these things is quite useful, because obviously there is a group in the BIM4Housing. So I guess, George, that would be quite interesting. And I think as all things, especially in my mind, is, or for me, if it's an opportunity for you in a future session to show, but maybe on a sort of a relatively typical housing or an education project,
relevant,
how this works, because obviously you've got the mega projects, that's one thing, but I guess most people on this call, but most of the team on the call will probably have experience of housing and education, or generally something of that nature. That show and tell would be really useful, I think.
Well, round two, bearing in mind the Cabinet Officer meeting us on Friday to say how can the Alliance help them with FMS 002 and FMS 007, which is backlog maintenance. The four biggest players need the help first. The people running the largest estates with the biggest sort of backlog problems. So the NHS, Department of Education, and the Defence Estates and Ministry of Justice want to go big on how to turn it on. It's a replicatable approach. So it could be housing, it could be a bank, it could be an airport. It's the same thing. It's just different asset base, and houses are simpler and schools are simpler than some of the other ones we're looking at. My point is, guidance note to stop people asking for the wrong thing is something you can do quickly. And if Uniclass say don't just use Uniclass, it means something. And as the gentleman said, Franco said, there's an awful lot of people, thousands of them, trying to map, but none of them have done it with one perspective rather than it works for everything. And to be perfectly honest, if we give them for free, they don't have to keep doing that, do they? So that's the biggest win, is to stop people mapping to death and then helping them know how to use it properly for the right thing. Handing over buildings, setting up an asset register, firing up a capital system, fire safety, and loading into an active plan. Whatever the plain language activity is, how should we do it best? And then all of a sudden it becomes much more useful to people, is how we see this being helpful.
That makes sense. And I think it's the, from an architectural point of view, we're kind of over the many years is learning more about operational sides of projects, as well as the design briefing, which is not normally our kind of normal remit via the RIBA stage as such. But as I say, you've got to know that to then be able to work backwards. I think Joe, you made a comment in the chat about a funny little scenario that you had. I don't know if you want to expand on that. Hi, you okay?
Yeah, I'm good. It wasn't funny at the time. So yeah, I mean, it was just an example of some of the kind of nonsense that we see around classification and BEPS to that end. And the example was, we kept getting our models rejected. And the outcome, they were kind of saying, well, it doesn't match the requirements of the BEP. And we'd done all of our classification for all the elements that we were contractually responsible for. But the line in the BEP said all model elements require Uniclass classification. So when I went back and queried this, they were kind of saying, well, basically they'd just done a blind report that did a check to say, has everything got classification? And it kept coming back as no. But when you looked into it in more detail, it was things like the bushes and the void objects and all stuff that was kind of totally irrelevant. So, quite maybe a bit flippantly, I just selected them all and gave them a random classification, submitted the model, and it passed with flying colours.
Because you tick the box,
I've ticked the box, but what I worry about all of this is, I always go back to, where's the value in that exercise? We're supposed to be adding value to this process, and we're just, our architects are swamped with all of this, completely. Wrestling with data is not a natural thing for an architect to do, I think, quite often, and it's not helped with the advice of some of the consultants that we deal with.
Yeah, and I agree that a lot of consultants will say, I can do your asset information requirements. In projects, they've got much better. In operation, they're making it up. And to be perfectly honest, they're misleading the client, and the client's not sure, so he trusts them. He's not helping.
Exactly.
if you do the right to left thinking, why do we want the data? I mean, George or someone was saying earlier, what's the data for? To preview fire stock properly, or to address any anomalies and do remedial actions? So it ain't rocket science if you do right to left thinking. I want the data that supports the building, the floors, the space, the assets I know that exist, and the extra data is attributes. I need it to stop fire spotting and compliance issues. I need it to do the maintenance properly, to keep out of jail and be critical maintenance so I don't overdo it. That's where I'm coming from, to make this more understandable in plain language. Why is the data needed to support the activity it supports? And the scary thing is, most of the data is already there. We just let it get misused, abused, or overcomplicate it. And yes, we should check. I mean, I see the asset information assurance checkers becomes a new service in projects, but they're doing a tick box exercise. Not that the data is right; they just you've allocated a reference to it. That's not necessarily what you're about. So I think it's about how the client wants to get better data, not how the client wants to create a process to check that we're all fudging it.
Yeah, so just talking about what Andy's just suggested there, the right to left process, why we're doing things. What we've been trying to do this last month or so, and I'd be very interested to see if anybody else wants to contribute to this. I know Joe is doing so already, and given the fact I've only just sent you the email, the spreadsheet, but if I just explain what we're trying to do here, what we've done is looked at the golden thread process through not just the plan of work, but what activities are being carried out. So one of it is making sure, as Andy was saying there at the beginning, the requirements are aligned. Then how we're going to capture the information, how we're going to capture product information, how we're going to validate it, etc. And then we've then moved across here to say, well, what are the financial benefits? Because at the end of the day, we're following maybe a BEP or whatever, but why are we doing it? And this is the right to left process, I think. So what we've done is gone through this, and I'd be very keen for people to maybe look at this and see whether it could be improved. But we've tried to come up with some tangible benefits, but then related those to financial outcomes. So then what we've then done is said, right, if we can have better standardization, so what are the outcomes of that? The same with cost reduction, the same with integrated, making it easier for supply chains to be responsible for what they're doing. So these are all benefits, we think, of the golden thread. And then we've tried to put some sort of cost value against that. I was talking to Chun earlier, and he was saying that, just to eliminate some of the rework is going to probably easily do. So I'd be interested in anybody, if you're interested in getting involved in this, if you just put benefits in the chat, put benefits in the chat, I'll share this with you, and we can then follow that through. Is that helpful?
A couple of quick points, if I may, George. The ROBA gives us a staged approach for building buildings and refurbishing buildings. The activities that relate to FM, I've been working with the BSs and others to go, in plain language, can we just define the activities that run a building? We maintain it, we renew it, we sustain it, we hand it over, we do refurbs. If we lock in on the activity, we can go after the data we need.
Exactly.
Okay, but we were in danger. A lot of your phrases there are quite generic and not sure how they would link back to. So the building, it's pretty straightforward. But we could be better at handover for maintaining, renewing, sustaining, end of life, and sticking it in technology. Those activities will allow us to then say the data I need to do that and the purpose it means to the stakeholder, the client owner or the house owner. Why would they care? One, they want to keep out of jail. One, they want to be compliance with legislative standards and whatever, Building Safety Act and so forth. The rest is they just want it to run efficiently and not cost them too much money. Okay.
Yeah, and there's going to be different stakeholders want different things, though, isn't there, Andy? So that's actually the point.
Yeah, but this is why if you take the view of life cycle, you ask the question, what data do you need to create a whole life from a designer's audience and constructor's audience? Then from a maintainer, would that work for you? And what else would you want? It drives what I call the exemplar model. Okay. What do I need to do fire safety is just one facet of getting that model to work.
Absolutely.
Okay? And if you build that model, and when I did Network Rail, surprisingly in 2002, they did a nice drawing on one page which covers every one of their 40,000 stations, lineside buildings on one page. They broke it into platforms. We all use that when we get on the train. Canopies, they may have a cover over you to stick the rain off you. Footbridges, underpasses, and obviously train sheds and the car park and the main building. Now that drawing has a little dot on it to say all the things you do to build, maintain, replace is the common language, right? 2002, they knew that. So they build it, maintain it, replace it using the same, it's boiler, it's a platform surface, it's a canopy, it's a stove. And that means we can then add data to it that allows us to run it efficiently. Is it about to fall over and hurt somebody by, gets rusty and drops on somebody? The whole world changed when you create that simple model. And then if you knew the activities, we get after the information that's essential and relevant.
So what we're trying to do with this is provide people who are in the information management role with a way of communicating to their senior directors some of the value that's being. Now, whether these are the right benefits or not, Andy, I don't know, but they're certainly a good starting point for us to build from. But the overall principle that we're trying to get to is how can we make it so that people that are making budgetary decisions, procurement people in many cases, are then interpreting that. And what they're not doing is allowing enough in the budget for doing the fire stopping properly or for.
Correct. Yeah.
So if anybody's interested in contributing to this, then, as I say, just put benefits in the chat.
Well, on
Brilliant.
that note, George, I'm conscious of time, so it's been really, thank you for everyone's contribution, Andy. Really, really useful. And like I said, I think there's a couple of follow-up there in terms of maybe doing a little bit of case study sharing. That'd be fantastic. Yeah, look forward to catching up with everyone in the next session.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody.
Everyone.
Particularly
Cheers,
the new people. Yeah.
Yeah. Keep coming.
Good to meet you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.